welcome back to the channel Home of Programming. In today's session, we are going to learn about some recursive function, static attributes, constructor and destructor. So we will learn the description of these types, which is we will learn theoretically about these recursion, static attributes, constructor and destructor. So after learning what exactly all these things are, we will get into a demonstration of these things, right? So let's get started with recursion. So recursion is nothing but a function calling itself, right? So in our previous programming paradigms, you might have seen that we will define a function inside a class, and in the main function we will create an object for that particular class, and using that object we will call any other functions, right? So this is an usual way of calling function. However, there exists a special condition, which is a function can call itself. That is known as recursion, right? So most probably where we can use recursion is factorial program. So you might have seen the factorial program. In that, if you are having the function as fact, inside that function itself we will call the factorial of function. That is, we will call that function inside that function itself, right? So this is about recursion, right? So let's move on to static attributes. So we have discussed about this in our previous sessions itself. This particular static modifier can be applied to a variable or a function. So if a variable is declared with the modifier static, that variable will get initialized to 0 if no value is explicitly mentioned, right? In another case, if static modifier is applied to a function, that particular function can be called without a need of object, right? So this is about your static modifier. And let's move on to constructor and destructor, right? So constructor is also a function whose name is same as a class name. And one more thing about both constructor and destructor is these constructor and destructor look like a function, but these constructor and destructor doesn't have a return type, right? And the main thing about constructor and destructor is these both constructor and destructor name should be similar to the class name, right? So the purpose of constructor is to allocate a memory space, right? Whereas the purpose of destructor is to remove a memory space allocated by constructor, right? So this particular constructor gets automatically invoked whenever a matching object of that type is created, which is, for example, if you are having a parameterized constructor, you should create an object for that particular class with some parameter. So in that particular instant, your parameterized constructor will get invoked. And when we come back to destructor, there is no special case of when the destructor will be called. So here the .NET framework will automatically call the destructor whenever there is no need of using that particular object. So if there is no need of using that particular object, .NET framework will automatically call the destructor to remove the allocated memory space for that particular object, right? So this is about recursion, static modifier, constructor and destructor. So let's move into demonstration. So here we have created a new project inside Visual Studio 2019 for C#, right? So now what I am going to do is I am going to create a simple function for demonstrating the use of recursion, right? For that we can create some variables like one of type character and another variable for looping which is of type integer, right? So I am going to initialize this particular variable of I to 0, right? So I am going to create a function called fun. Inside the function I am going to print the value of the variable a, right? concatenate, we have to use the operator plus, right? So in that I am going to use while loop with some condition like I less than or equal to 25, and I am going to increment the value of I inside it. Without printing the statement, I can call function function itself, right? So this is a fun function. Inside this function we are calling that function itself, right? So which is known as recursion. So let's run the program. So before running the program, we need to initialize a value for the variable a, right? So char a is equal to a. So now run the program. You will get the value of a printed to be printed for up to 25 times. So what we have to do for that is we need to create an object for the class, and we have to call the function using that particular object, so that this particular fun function gets invoked and corresponding output will be displayed, right? So we have created two variables a and I. So one is of type character and another one is of type integer. So here we have created a function called fun. So inside the function I have printed some statement and some looping construct is that. In that looping construct inside the function, I am calling that function, right, which is known as recursion. Now run the program. So you can see that the particular value of a is printed up to the value of I to be 25. That is, until the given condition is true, it is printed, right? So this is a way of using recursive function inside your program. So in the same function itself, I am making the value, another one variable of static int b, right? So I am not going to assign any set of values for that particular variable b, and I am going to print that. So if I am running the program, so I can see printing the value of a, which is 0. So this is a reason and advantage of using the static variable. So if no value is explicitly mentioned for your static variable, it will automatically get initialized to 0, right? So let's move on to creating static functions. So we can make this fun function as static. So now what I can do is I can just call the function. So without a need of object. So there is no need of creating an object here. So without creating object, I can call the static function. So one more thing about your static function is static function should contain only the static modifiers. So because this is a static function, right? Inside it, I should not use any other variables except static variables. So if I am removing this static modifier for the I variable, we are getting an error. So the error is an object reference is required for non-static field. So which is we have to use only the static modifier inside the static function. So now you can run the program. Again the same output will be printed, right? So again the value of a is going to be 0. So if you want to increment it, we can increment and print it, right? So that is possible. So if I am incrementing the value, so that is possible. Only thing to remember about static variable is if no value is explicitly mentioned, the value will automatically initialized to 0. So the starting value will be 0. After that it is incremented, right? So in this way you can use static functions and static variables, right? So then we can learn about constructor. So constructor is also a function whose name is similar as class name. In this case our class name is program, so that we have to create a constructor in that name itself, right? So the constructor should not have any return type. So if I am typing void like this, so we will get an error. Member name cannot be same as the enclosing type. So we have to create constructor without an return type, right? So inside this constructor we can type something like default constructor. So similarly we can create another one constructor with some values like program of int k comma int l. So inside it we can type it as parameterized constructor, and we can also type the value of variables k and l, right? So the value of k is key. Similarly, the value of l is l, right? So now we can call this constructor but just by creating an object. So there is no need of explicit calling. So explicit calling will result in an error, right? So explicit calling for constructor will result in an error. So program P1 is equal to new program of 25, 20. So now this k and l will get the values 25 and 20 respectively. So k will be equal to 25, l will be equal to 20. So now run the program. Default constructor parameterized and the value of k and l has been printed, right? So in this way you can print the program. So there is no order of execution for your constructor. It depends on the object creation. So if I am creating parameterized object first, the parameterized constructor will get invoked first and then the default constructor will get invoked. So similarly we can also create destructor with 10 symbol like program of. So in that we can simply write as console.writeLine of destructor call, something like that. So this is about your constructor and destructor. So in this session we have learned about recursive function, static modifier, constructor and destructor. I hope all these concepts are clear to you. If you are having any queries, you can post your queries in the comment section. So stay tuned with Home of Programming for getting live updates regarding programming, and subscribe to our channel for getting more updates regarding programming. Thank you.